Okay, good morning or afternoon. Welcome to Moodle Day for November 9th. I hope that you had an opportunity to either watch volleyball or get some good rest from yesterday. So let's go ahead and get started on our next section, which is 5-1. Before we get started, let's look ahead at what's going on. We have Monday, we have an RFC test. Tuesday, we're going to review this material to make sure you have a full understanding of it and move on to 5-2, followed by 5-3. We'll take a break in our new chapter and have our chapter 4 test, and also your RFC sheet is due on Thursday. Friday will be a half day, and we're going to do a special type 1 diabetes lesson. Defined as this can be identified as your Y, and this is often your X. We did a little bit of this last chapter. Okay, so as we move on, there's some steps for finding the rate of change using a table. So you can see here, I've listed the steps 1 through 6. So the first one tells us to identify which is our independent and dependent variable. Since chain distance is being affected by the time is my independent variable, and distance is my dependent. Okay, then it says find the change in the dependent variable. So what we're doing is we're finding the difference between these two terms. So I'm going to go ahead and take 520 and subtract 260. This is easier to do vertically. 520 minus 260. Go ahead and borrow. 12 minus 6 is 6, and 4 minus 2 is 2. So now we know this is equal to 260. And then it says to find the change in the independent variable. I need to be at the same step. Can't look at a different step. At the same step. So we did from 520 to 260. So now we're going to do from 2 to 1, which is 2 minus 1, which is 1. Now the next thing is to divide. Remember, the dependent variable is what is on the numerator. So our 260 is our numerator. And then our independent variable is our denominator, which in this case is 1. And then we can simplify that into 260. But it says here, don't forget the units. What are my units? So we identify these units here at this level. So this was feet, and this was minutes. We can use our table to help us find that information. So this is 260 feet per minute. So now it's asking us, what does the rate of change represent? It represents that for every minute, there's an increase in 260 feet. So usually there'll be some sort of story problem that goes along with this to identify what we're talking about here. Okay, let's go ahead and look at another example of this. So let's find this on our own. Example, determine whether the rate of change is constant. So what this is just asking is, does it stay the same from each step? In this case, it does. So yes, the rate of change is constant. Now we're going to go through our steps and identify. The first step was identify our independent and dependent variables. This is my independent, and this is my dependent. Okay, so then the step 2 told us to go ahead and find the change in the dependent, which we already did here. 4 minus 2 equals 2. Then find the change in the independent right here. 4 minus 2 equals 2. Then we're going to divide the dependent by the independent. simplify, and then now we need to identify our units. So this is buns per hot dog. So what this is saying that there is one bun for every hot dog, which is perfect for a barbecue. Okay, so now we're going to be finding slope of a line. Slope is very similar, if not the same, as rate of change. Rate of change, and we're usually dealing with real life problems. Slope, we're actually looking at a graph. So slope is identified as the vertical change. Vertical is up and down over horizontal change, which is side to side. This is also represented as change in y over change in x. And the reason is because if we have our Cartesian plane, we have x and y. Y is vertical and x is horizontal. So change in y over change in x, which you often hear as rise over run. And then there's also a formula, so when we have points, this is y2 minus y1 all over x2 minus x1. We'll look a little more closely about how that works with an individual point. Okay, so first thing is finding slope from a graph. So you have the graph of a line here. We can see it graphed here. The first thing to do is identify 2 points that cross at an intersection of x and y. But in between is too difficult to find. So here I have a point and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, -2. And this point over here is 0, 3. And then we're just counting boxes. So remember we said it's rise over run. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to count up the rise from the lower point. So my lower point is right here, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So my rise is 4. Next, it says to count over to our run point. So I'm going to count over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Our run is 5. Important to remember that because left is negative, this is a -5 since I went left for my rise. If I go right for my rise this way, then it's positive and my slope will be positive. But whenever I go left, my slope is negative. So now we're going to write this as a fraction. Remember, our fraction is rise over run. Our rise was 4. Our run was -5. So our slope is -4 over 5, or negative total 4 over 5. We could also say it's 4 over -5. Either way, it's negative. Okay, so now we're going to be given 2 points and we need to find the slope. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to identify our first and second point and label them properly. So you see here, what is the slope of the line through -1, 0, and 3, -2. So I'm going to label these. And what we mean by labeling is labeling them x1 and y1. Since this is my first x point, this is my x1, and since this is my first y point, this is my y1. Remember, a point is always in the form x, comma, y, or an ordered pair. So now my second point, since it's my second point, it'll be labeled x2 and y2. It does not matter which one you label as your first point and your second point, as long as both parts, you can't have x1 and y2 or y1 and x2. They both need to match for that point. So then it says write the formula. We write the formula so we can remember it. The formula said y2 minus y1 all over x2 minus x1. Now we're going to substitute these points in that we have here. So we have y2 is right here, is -2, minus our y1, which was 0, all over our x2, which is 3, minus our x1, which is -1. We have to really pay attention to our rules for positives and negatives here. -2 plus -0, you can't have -0, is -2. But if we look down here, this is minus a negative, so we change it into adding. 3 plus, we add the opposite, which would make it positive, so this is over 4. So now our last step is to reduce -2 over 4. They can both be divided by 2, and that gives us -1 over 2. Do not forget your negative slope. So the slope of the line through points -1, 0, and 3, -2 is -1/2. Okay, the formula. So I'm going to go ahead and pick this point and this point. This is -2, comma 3, and this is +2, comma -3. Okay, so remember our slope of the line is y2 minus y1 all over x2 minus x1. And our first step is to identify our points. So -2, -3, I'm going to say this is my x1 and my y1, and then my other point 2, comma -3 will be my x2 and my y2. Next step is to substitute them into my equation. So y2 right here is -3 minus my y1, which is -3, all over my x2, which is 2, minus my x1, which is -1. Now I'm going to go ahead and apply the rules for change opposite. -3 plus 3 is 0 divided by 4. Anything 0 divided by 4 is 0. So the slope of this line is equal to 0. The slope of all horizontal lines the slope is always, no matter what, equal to 0. Okay, so let's do the same thing with our vertical lines here. And I'm going to pick this point, which is 3, comma 2, and I'm going to go ahead and pick this point, which is 3, -2. So y2 minus y1 all over x2 minus x1. y2, I'm going to identify this as my x1, y1, x2, y2. So now y2, -2 minus 2 all over 3 minus 3. So this gives me -4 all over 0. This is a problem. What do we have whenever we divide by 0? We can't divide by 0. It's undefined. So the slope of any vertical line is always undefined. The slope is undefined. And we can remember this because there isn't a slope on a cliff. It's falling off. It's not a slope, it's a cliff. Okay, so there you have the information assignment that's going to be collected on Monday. Is page 298 through 299, number 10, and then 11 through 33 odd. See you on Monday.